So I think this session is going to be one that epitomizes Facebook and the way we work. We have on our campus a square, which is called Hack Square. And it's not hack in the conventional sense that I understood, which is to hack into some kind of system, very topical at the moment, so I will not discuss that too much. But it's to iterate and innovate where necessary, and to work around challenges and problems. And today we've met a challenge with timing. We've already lost one panelist and clearly lost some participants as well. We hope we'll be joined by them. But I just wanted to say a few opening remarks and speak about what we are trying to do here today. When we spoke to Transform Africa and they invited us to put on this session, we wanted to highlight what we believe the steps that Africa needs to take, Africans and Africa needs to take in order to transform itself, to be transformed. And we wanted to highlight and actually correct something that we as a company, in my view, haven't done a good enough job of doing, and that's to tell the Facebook story. How we are working in partnership, and everything we do is in partnership with mobile operators, with governments, with civil society organizations, in order to transform this continent, both in terms of the connectivity that underpins everything we're trying to do here at Transform and beyond, but also in terms of the economic opportunities that will be leveraged through that connectivity. Today we're going to have a couple of presentations, and then I'm going to invite some distinguished panelists to come and speak with us and answer some questions, hopefully. But at the same time, again, in a very best way, a very Facebook way, we want this to be a very interactive conversation, and one in which the audience, with your expertise, experiences, questions, knowledge, etc., also participate. So we will encourage you when the time comes for the panel discussions. If there are burning questions, do feel free to take over some moderation and ask those questions, or you can leave those to the end. And we're hoping, as Facebook always does, which is to learn from you guys, hopefully, but also to share information and move things forward. First of all, I want to invite our Director of Global Connectivity Policy, Dr. Pepper. Many of you will know him as Pepper, but Dr. Robert Pepper, to come and speak about some of the data that Facebook has worked with others to produce that should enable policymakers, regulators, and indeed those who are providing connectivity to make evidence-based decisions about what to do.
Thank you, Kojo. So I think some of you know that we've been partnering with the Economist Intelligence Unit for a number of years now to look at a number of indicators globally in what is now they have called the Inclusive Internet Index. We look at it comes in multiple parts. We just released the latest data at the Mobile World Congress in February. And so the data that you're seeing are actually new, and I've pulled it together specifically to focus on Africa. There's a number of parts to the study, and all the data are collected by The Economist, and the number crunching and the analytics is all done by The Economist. We partner with them. One of the things that I wanted to do when we started the project was make all the data available publicly, because oftentimes there are these studies, indices, and so on that are black boxes. You have no idea what's inside. You don't know where the data are. But all of the data down to the Excel spreadsheet are available online, and I'll show you the URL later, and we can make this presentation available as well. In addition, each year The Economist has a survey that's associated with the study, looking at these indicators. It's called the Value of Internet Survey. It's a survey of 100, the index is 100 countries, the survey is of 99 of the countries. And I'm not gonna, because of time, I'm not gonna go through all of the details here. In fact, there are a lot of numbers, but I'm gonna go to the bottom lines and explain how we use the data, working in partnership, as Kojo said, with countries. So the top line finding this year in this index is very disturbing, and it's very disturbing particularly in this region. And that is, over the last number of years, last 15 years, we've been closing the digital divide. We've been making huge progress closing the gap between rich countries and low-income countries. And what the economist found this year looking at the study is that the progress being made by the lowest income countries has stalled. They have not improved. And what they've done is they've taken a look at the different quartiles of countries based on income. Highest income, high middle, and low income. And within the 100 countries, 27 countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. 16 of those countries are low-income countries. So what this bottom line finding tells us is that the progress that's been made in the past is stalling out. And if it's a one-year problem, that's bad. If it's a trend, it's terrible. And I'll explain, even with some other data, why that is so. But this is something that we really need to focus on because it's just not acceptable. These are the top line findings. I just wanted to call out the top one. And I'll go through some of these other findings as well to show you how we use the data. And then I'm happy to have conversations over the next 2 days doing deeper dives and looking at some of the other countries as well. It's a lot of numbers, and I don't expect you to actually even be able to see all of them. But the value of Internet survey, this is focusing specifically on sub-Saharan Africa. And what this tells us is that, by the way, this is for people who are already online. So it's a survey of people online globally. And what we see here is that in the region, and then it's broken out by demographics, but in the region, these are the percent of people who say they have used the internet to develop new skills for work. 4 out of 5. And each year the survey has consistent baseline questions, but then has a series of unique questions. And this year the questions were focused on livelihood. How has the internet helped you, if at all, with your livelihood? And what we see is that there's absolutely no question, and in fact, half the people surveyed in sub-Saharan Africa, 47% said their job would not exist without the internet. If that's the case, and we're pretty confident in the results, the top line finding I just described, that the gap is growing and that the lowest income countries are no longer improving, and that even the low middle income countries are moving up and improving but leaving behind the lowest income. If that gap, if that stalling is correct, and the data here are correct in terms of the importance of the internet for people's livelihood, that makes it even worse. That compounds the problem with this growing, with this new, perhaps, reemergence of the digital divide. One of the things here I just want to point out, top challenges for developing my skills online. Half the people said poor internet quality, and that's particularly the case for low-income people who cannot afford the higher quality connections. Again, big implications that reinforce everything that the heads of state and the people talked about in this morning's opening session and yesterday at the Economics Day. These are the 53 indicators that the economist looks at, and they're grouped into 4 areas. Availability, is the network available? Affordability, relevance, and readiness. And each country, for each one of those indicators, there is a score that's built into the model that the economist uses. This is the index. These are the 27 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the number next to the country. So they are ranked here within the region. The number is associated with their global rank. And you can see that there's some of the countries are doing fairly well, quite well, others are not. I'm going to focus on 3 countries to give you an idea of how we can use the data, how you can use the data. I'm going to focus on the DRC, which is at the bottom, although it's improving, and there's some things happening most recently in terms of new government and some policy changes that give us some optimism. I'm going to look at Rwanda because we're here, and Rwanda has really moved up in the last several years. And then also Nigeria, which is not at the top, although it is at the top on affordability within the region. But it's one of the countries in the region that's doing quite well. For each of the countries, just some top-line results that you can look at. This is mostly, with one exception, this is all about their network and network performance. So this looks at the number of people, by the way, on the data, the report was released in February. The economists collected the data in the last half of 2018. So there is a lag between, and the data were collected in the last half of 18, and some of the data were reported by governments and operators in the first half of 18. So there's a lag time. So for example, here, what you see is that the findings that there was no 4G in the DRC. They've now begun to actually build out 4G. So there's about a year lag time. But the point is that when we take a look at and now that we have the time series, the year to year is less, a particular point in time is less important than the trend lines. And we now have the trend lines that we can look at. So in the DRC, this is the Sub-Saharan Africa compared with the rest of the world. The one thing I do want to call out, because there are multiple sessions tomorrow, as well as having them called out today, which is the gender gap. We cannot have an inclusive internet if half the population is not connected. And what you see here is the number at the bottom is the percentage difference between men and women being online. The number, you'd like to have that number be 0, because that means there's gender equality in online connections. And what you see is the region lags the rest of the world quite significantly. When we look at it in terms of improvement and mapping it this way on the gender gap, you can see even other parts of the world, other regions that have low-income populations and low-income countries do not do as well in terms of gender equality. When we look at the DRC, you have here in the region, and again with the lag time, this is based on households, about 19% of households were connected to the internet. In the DRC, it was 3%. When you take a look at the network performance, which is mobile download, upload, and latency, you can see and compare the country to the region and the region to the rest of the world, and you can see that gender equality in the DRC lags even the regional benchmark. Now, this is actually, for me, much more relevant than any index. It's not about where a country is or even specific indicators. It's using the data as a tool to develop a diagnostic, to work to figure out what can I do to improve? Where do I have some strengths to build on? Where are the biggest gaps that I have that I can work on to improve, and where do I put my efforts? It's all about identifying impact and feasibility and setting priorities of where I can make a difference. And every country, every government can use, anybody can use it, but we work with governments to help them build agendas on how to improve their ICT environment. So in the DRC on availability, what we see, by the way, is that strengths, the competitive environment and local content, relatively speaking, is pretty good, right? It's not the bottom. And in fact, on relevance, in terms of the local content, there's a high score for local content, and that's because they have basic information and eGov content in local language. So that's a real strength to build on. Availability, the network, right? Network performance is very poor. It's beginning to be improved. We are working in the DRC. We have projects in the DRC. We're partnering there with operators and working with government to improve the network availability. But right now, that's one of the weakest points. Readiness is weak, again, because of low female inclusion, and the gender gap is pretty large. And I apologize for whipping through these, but because of the time constraints, I just want to go through some top lines, and then happy to have conversations afterwards. And I can also pull up data for the other countries. Here in Rwanda, what you see is that on average, in terms of households connected to the internet, it's twice the regional average. When you look at network coverage, 2G is at 100%, 99.9. 4G is 97%. Very high coverage of 4G. On the other hand, when I look at this, what we see is that the network performance is not even as good as the average for the region. Now, on first blush, that doesn't make any sense because there is wide 4G coverage. What's the problem? Turns out, right, it's backhaul. Backhaul is one of the issues. And on the specific cell sites, perhaps it's the way the cells are divided with the antenna. But in conversations with Patrick, the regulator here, when I showed him the data a couple of weeks ago, I said, I don't understand why that is. That's a big question mark for me. And he immediately said, we have problems with backhaul. And you heard that earlier today on some of the sessions. So again, this is a very good and very sensitive diagnostic to these kinds of issues to focus on improvement. And the gender gap here, while still 50%, and again, using the data on the gender gap, what that means, for example, is that 15% of men are connected on the, again, it was a year's lag, but only 10% of women. So there's that 50%, that's where that 50% comes from. But that's an improvement over the previous year, right? So a negative number, change in gender gap, down by 5%, that's good. You want that number to be going down, not up. And we also have year-over-year changes now because we have time series, and what you can see is that rural electricity access increased more than 200% between 2017 and 2018. Areas of strength here, not surprising, policy, right? A really good policy environment, trust and safety, and the competitive environment. And in fact, when you look at, and a weakness though is affordability, there's good competition, but it was brought down because of the high price for fixed broadband, not mobile broadband. Readiness strengths here are quite important. There is a strong privacy regulation, and there's high trust in government information online with the eGov services, right? Which speaks to President Kagame's agenda for the last X number of years, where this has been a priority for him. And so you can see that with the strengths and the areas needed for improvement, but over the years, and also where Rwanda ranks within the region, it's quite good. Nigeria. Nigeria is interesting. It ranks, if you recall, quite well at the top, near the top within the region. In fact, on affordability, it was the most affordable country in the region. But there are other kinds of challenges. On availability, the network because of the network in the rural areas, has slow speeds. If you take a look at the performance of the network, the download, the upload, and the latency. When we look at the gender gap, though, it's much, much better than the rest of the region. In fact, the gender gap in Nigeria improved dramatically year over year in terms of the data. On affordability, it's very good, and in part that's because of the strong competition. In relevance, it does very well, and in fact it's third, it ranks third in the region and in the mid-tier 47 globally, and that's because of local content, which is not surprising because of Nollywood. On the other hand, the ranking on relevance was brought down because of frankly, it improved, but there were still not enough eGov applications that the economist found in local language. Readiness is very strong. The NCC has been around a long time. There is good competition. There is good regulation. There is a balance and opened up the market for competitors. There's also low literacy. Literacy brought it down a little bit. There's some literacy issues. What was interesting in comparison to Rwanda is that there's low trust in government websites in Nigeria, whereas there was high trust in government websites here. And that's not about regulation. That's not about supply side. Those are things that government can actually change themselves by knowing that that's something to address, they can address it. And as I mentioned earlier, the improvement in gender gap was dramatic year over year. So those are just 3 examples of countries with a slightly deeper dive from the data. Happy to talk about it. And all of the data are available on the EIU website, all 53 indicators for each of the 100 countries, and you can download it yourself. It's in an Excel spreadsheet format. You can crunch your own numbers, but we also are very happy to work with you developing sort of and unpacking the diagnosis for your countries, helping you build agendas on how to improve both on the supply side and the demand side and the other aspects of the both hard and soft infrastructure. Thank you very much.
So I left the room to check on something, but I do hope that Pepper mentioned that one of the reasons why we've invested in the EIU and are working with the unit is to answer one of the calls that we heard from government and from regulators, that there is a deficiency in the data out there, and there is a need to have more evidence-based decision-making and more data. So now I want to talk to you about what Facebook is doing. As I said at the start, we are trying to create the foundations for this transformed Africa. In addition to the connectivity side, there's lots of work we're doing, hopefully to bring new tech to Africa where that connectivity does exist, and to improve economic outcomes for Africans and Africa. And we are firmly of the belief that a transformed Africa, if we work together and in the right way, and within the policy and regulatory frameworks that government are putting in place, will transpire. I should have introduced myself actually, because I realize that some of you don't know me. My name is Kojo Boachi. I'm the head of connectivity and access policy with Facebook here in sub-Saharan Africa, and I work as part of a very excellent Africa policy team within Facebook. Again, I'm going to talk to you about the connectivity challenge here on the continent, some of the investments we're making, not to close the digital divide, but to eradicate it, some of the innovative technology we're working on globally, but also what we believe should be here in Africa now, and how we're helping women, entrepreneurs, young tech startups to harness the opportunities in front of them. So the connectivity challenge, I'll start with our mission, which is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. And that's obviously undermined when half the world remains offline. And the challenge is even more acute in Africa. If you look at ITU statistics, for example, 24% of people are using the internet at the moment. That's bad for Africa. It undermines effort towards a transformed Africa. And it's also bad for our company. I think Pepper touched on the challenges. I think we all agree that access, affordability, relevance, and this increasing look at readiness. How ready are we in terms of strategy, in terms of digital literacy, are we to harness the opportunities? And these remain stumbling blocks, but they are stumbling blocks and challenges that we can surmount. And we're infused by lots of examples from around the world. But this one's really interesting. This is how people connect to Facebook in December 2017. And it's one of the reasons why we believe we can move the needle really quickly with the right investments, the right partnerships, and the right policy and regulatory environments. If you look at how people connect for either 2G, 3G, or 4G, the areas and the primary way they connect is lit up here. So you'll see the blue areas where people connect with 3G, the red areas are where they connect with 2G to Facebook at the moment, and the yellow areas are where they're connecting with 4G. And remember, this is the primary means, the primary way in which people connect. So you may have areas in which there is a 4G connection, but most people connect through 3G and so on. And why we're infused is if you look at Latin America, the East Coast, or if you look at India in 2017, clearly blue and clearly yellow and maybe orange because there's lots of red connectivity. And just 1 year later, we see a shift. Much more blue in Latin America, where policy and regulatory developments have really progressed. And a huge shift in India, where one company invested tens of billions of dollars in a policy and regulatory environment that enabled them to go out and roll out 4G connectivity. India went from that orangey color, that large connection of red. I wish I could go back. So India went from being orangey, I call it orangey, I don't know if that's a color, to a deep yellow, where 4G connectivity came. And that should infuse all of us and make us all confident that with the right policy and reg, with the right partnerships and with the right investments, we can move. So we hear a lot about investing to close the digital divide. We must close the digital divide. But for me, that always means that we're playing a game of catch-up. And as Africans, I don't believe we need to play catch-up. So what we're working to do at Facebook with partners and with governments is to eradicate this divide. And that fits in with Facebook's 10-year plan. We started off as Facebook and Instagram, as you guys will know. We expanded and became Facebook with WhatsApp, Workplace, Messenger, etc. And as I'm going to show you later, we're now moving into areas where we want to take technologies such as VR, AR, and AI to the masses. We believe in the benefits of these technologies, and we believe in the importance in the need for connectivity in order to enable those technologies. So our investments are broad. Throughout the whole value chain, every part of connectivity, from submarine cables to long-haul backhaul, metro fiber, and indeed the last mile. We are trying to connect everybody, and we are working towards, those of you who follow the Sustainable Development Goals, we are working towards Goal 9C heavily in order to have universal connectivity in the least developed countries, which means more developed than the most developed countries, it should be a given. Submarine cables are a big thing for us. I'm not sure what's happened to this slide, so I apologize, but we've made huge investments in APAC, in Europe, and in LATAM, and have considerations about Africa as well and what the needs might be. But where we've really moved the needle and where we've added millions of people and brought connectivity to areas, and something we're so enthusiastic about, are our fiber builds. The first one we did was in northern Uganda, in an area where many felt people didn't need or wouldn't use the connectivity that was there. And in partnership with Airtel, we're so grateful to Airtel, in partnership with BCS, we rolled out around 770 kilometers of fiber in this area of northern Uganda. And it's the impact that's left us more infused. I think we were told that perhaps by doing so, we would connect 76 cell sites. We've gone on to connect 109 of those cell sites, and all of those are 100% 3G, 100% 4G. impacting the lives with greater connectivity of more than 1.5 million people already. And I can go on telling this story, but my view is that pictures, and if you don't have pictures, video paint a better picture. Story, tell a better story.
I think it's a very simple equation. By introducing one small piece of technology, you're actually breaking the cycle of poverty.
Backhaul is a way to transmit your data traffic from the cell phone towers. And when we do that on fiber, you get really fast internet access.
When you're building such an expensive and humongous infrastructure, it makes most meaning to share it. So when multiple partners join together and co-build it, it makes immense sense both from the nation and also for these individual organizations.
The ultimate goal is to make sure that capacity, like the bandwidth, is not an issue. It's available and is cost effective. Facebook cannot do it by itself. We are the neutral party. We bring the partners together to reduce the cost for each partner. We know how to design networks in the US, so we use some of that expertise to help them select the equipment, select the type of fiber. It's a win-win situation for us and for the partners.
When we want to roll out fiber, that is usually the most difficult part of the telecom business.
It's very risky to string fiber. We could not do anything when it was raining. For safety reasons, we could not do anything. When you're trenching, the machines will get stuck.
There were quite a few challenges, the biggest one being the crossing of the Nile River. Do we drop the cable in the water? Do we construct towers? We managed to get fiber cable that is specially made to span 1.5 kilometers.
Every tower of Airtel actually provides 3G connectivity. This could not have happened if we had not been able to fiberize long distances.
I think the people who went and dug the trenches and built the fiber, we must give our full heart out to them for what they have done.
I was amazed at how fast business has picked up, how fast everyone is vibrant, they want to do business.
Bringing high-speed access really provides the appropriate platform for that entrepreneurial spirit.
The problem also is still very big. There are still 3.8 billion people not connected. So we're really excited the fact that we think the model can scale, the model can work.
When you can put the power of a phone in a person's hand, I think you can see the joy of them saying, I am now able to connect and communicate with the rest of the world.
I think we're proud of this Uganda build on so many levels. I think the speed at which we rolled out that connectivity speaks to how Facebook works and wants to work. I think the partnerships we built with Airtel and with BCS and the way we leveraged what was then a conducive policy environment was fantastic at the same time as well. But the 1.5 million people thus far who have found connectivity, free and 4G connectivity because of this build, are what makes us so enthusiastic about scaling this model, as Ibrahima, my learned friend, says, and moving forward with investments like this throughout sub-Saharan Africa. I should say, when I said then, and I stressed then, I should say that the policy environment in Uganda has changed, and many of you who are observers of ICT policy in the region will note that Uganda remains the only country in the world at the moment to have an OTT tax that stops people accessing services like Facebook and YouTube and Wikipedia unless they pay a small fee per day. And the Ugandan Communication Commission at the start of January gave us some indication of the impact thus far. They saw 2.5 million Ugandans, and these are the poorest Ugandans who are unable to afford that 5 cents a day, stop using the internet. But that hasn't stopped us. We've continued to look for those policy and regulatory environments in which Facebook and partners can go out and build this fiber infrastructure that is so important to transforming Africa, to giving us the connectivity that we need in order to create business and to improve our socioeconomic lives. Our investment in Nigeria, in Ogun and Edo State, almost 1,000 kilometers of fiber in collaboration with Main One, is testament to that. And again, I could speak to it, and I could go on speaking to it and tell you how that build went, but it's probably better I let a video tell the story.
If you give a Nigerian $1, he can turn it to $10 faster than anybody else in the world.
I work 5 days a week at the restaurant, then Saturday, Sunday, making my hats.
We don't have a physical store, so our orders are strictly online. You can't separate my business from the internet.
One of the foundations for CC Hub is, leveraging technology. You can't do that without internet. You can't reach people.
Broadband penetration rates in Nigeria still in the low 20%.
Nigeria is a big opportunity. It's the biggest country in Africa, about 180 million people. We're actively engaging with partners to expand fiber, to bring broadband connectivity to more users.
The mission is about connecting West Africa, building that digital backbone, deploying the infrastructure that's going to enable getting our people access. We're expanding backhaul capacity, coordinating with government officials, digging up one roadway at a time. These projects come with a certain degree of complexity.
It's tough. But there, come rain, come shine, and some terrains are difficult. So it's a collaborative effort to actualize this dream.
We have the capacity, we have the right partners to do this work, bridging the digital divide.
It's a major milestone for us to be able to deploy optic fiber. It's going to increase our GDP as a state.
It improves lives and economic outcomes.
You access all these people out there. We're creating a market.
All you need to do is to upload your products, and anybody that wants to reach out to you doesn't have any barrier.
Right now, with better internet access, we can create impact at a much larger scale.
Now, I post pictures of my hat online for customers to see. It transformed my business.
In 10, 15 years, we will have transformed the society.
If we could improve the outcomes for 100,000, for 1 million, for 100 million young people in West Africa, then my job is done.
I should say over the last few days, I've heard much about how government should invest in national backbones or backhaul fiber. And I think those who say that are absolutely correct. I think government should invest in that kind of fiber when the private sector fails to do so. But I think government's primary role, and where we've been able to roll out these kinds of projects successfully with partners such as Main One, Airtel, and BCS, is where the policy and regulatory environment has facilitated private sector investment. And there's a willingness from private sector players, and we know that from our conversations, to invest where those environments exist. I should say that it's not just backhaul. I could have spoken, and friends who know me well know I could speak for Ghana and for the UK if necessary, but I could have spoken, I could have gone on about other investments that we're making in the last mile as well, but these rural connectivity investments in some ultra low ARPU areas or low ARPU areas, investments that we're proud of as well and beginning to trial so we can connect those rural communities that are often forgotten. Again, working with partners such as BRIC in Kenya and also MTN. We're also proud of the TIP project, an initiative we started with just a few members that's grown to more than 500 members now, including some of the biggest technology companies in the world. And some of our investments that we're making to keep traffic in Africa. I think over the last few days, I've heard a lot about the need to keep data in Africa. I think there's a difference. I think we do have to keep traffic in Africa. because that's what brings the cost benefits. That's what enables us to create the affordability that's necessary to connect people. But the free movement of data, whether that be within Africa or beyond Africa and back to Africa, should be 100% necessary. And I was infused by the conversations I've had with people such as Lassina Kone yesterday evening, who said that he agreed, but we do need to have the right regulations and policies to enable the movement of that data safely. These are just some of the investments that we've made in cash, what some would call caching equipment and POPs within the Africa region already, to ensure that the most popular traffic that we generate, whether that be through WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, is kept in Africa to, again, create affordability, to reduce latency, etc. And then some of you are saying, well, you've given us access. What about this affordability and relevance question? I think one of the things we're proud of is free basics, and something that, again, speaks to the partnerships that we've built with operators across the continent, the MTNs, the Airtels, the Etisalats, etc., the Tigos, that have enabled us to roll out what is really a free data service that enables those who can't afford to attach the internet, those who don't understand how relevant it is to their lives, to experience the data, to have a data experience. And what we're enabling is African developers of content to provide services and applications that are used by some of the poorest, but also some of those who can afford to use services but want to manage their money slightly better. Available in 29 countries. And this is just a depiction of what that looks like on your mobile phone. Again, super skinny text-based services with some pictures in some cases that enable people to understand what the internet is and how it might benefit their lives. And what we've seen both for mobile operators and for governments intent on growing the number of people using the net and indeed paying for it is that this starts a trajectory towards people paying for internet usage. There are challenges. It's not all a glossy story. And some of those we've picked up. Poor data about ICT users in the ICT sector, something we're working with others to correct. Myths about OTTs. Many people say OTTs don't invest in infrastructure. And that's actually the reason why some governments have gone on to create policy and regulation because of that. Because we are supposed to be free riding when in fact we've been investing in infrastructure for many years now. The poor implementation of national broadband plans and the fact that national broadband plans appear to be missing in some cases. And you have high taxation, whether that be on services or even devices. Import tax on devices remains a bugbear of mine, largely because it creates black markets for devices and actually raises far less revenue than government might think. And then lastly there, internet shutdowns remains an issue, whether that be shutdowns in total, and we see some governments shut the internet down for months on end, or whether it be the shutdown of social media to circumscribe free speech. All of these things create a challenge to increasing internet access, increasing internet usage, and to providing those foundations to a transformed Africa in terms of connectivity. So if we resolve the challenges, imagine everything had been resolved, Africa is fully connected. What might we expect? Well, there's lots of innovative technology that we should expect that's already being rolled out around the world. And there were some presentations here from Google and others that presented lots of artificial intelligence technology. And the robot today, I've forgotten her name, I don't know if anyone remembers, Sophia, is an example of the kind of tech, I'm not sure I want that one, but it's an example of the kind of tech that we could see on the continent if we have the connectivity. One of the things we're working in, and a part of our company is Oculus, and this provides an AI virtual reality experience. We started off with Oculus Go, which you could just connect to through your smartphone, where you have connectivity to do so, and that gave experiences like visiting the new camp to watch Messi, or going to a UN refugee camp to understand the challenges in that camp. We then went on to Oculus Rift, which required a far bigger PC in order to power it. And recently, Mark has just announced Oculus Quest that would be shipping. I hate shipping because it's not a marketing thing, but it will be shipping to homes near you soon. But we'll provide a mix between the two, an at-home experience that highlights how virtual reality, AI, and AR can become so important to us. Already we're seeing many developers start to think about how they can use this technology. And And I know there are some in the audience, as I would, who are asking why are we just seeing games? And there's a place for games and things like that, but we're also seeing developers think about immersive computing and how that might impact our lives. There's lots of research to do in that area with graphics and eye tracking, etc. But they're also starting to think about social VR. Imagine this room was full, not by physical beings who were here with us, but by people who were desperate to come to Kigali to participate in a conference with us, but were unable to do so. And imagine we had the technology across this continent to enable us to be together and to have these virtual but real experiences, networking, talking, coming up with ideas. How many ideas and conversations have we missed out on purely because someone couldn't be here because of the cost? We believe VR, AR, VI, the technologies we're developing, the technologies we believe should be here now in Africa, could be super, super, super important for this continent. Already companies are starting to see it. And how might the private sector benefit from these technologies? We know Walmart is using it to train its staff. Walmart's a massive, I've never lived in the States, but it's a massive company that sells everything from batteries to lettuce, etc. And already they're starting to use VR. But for those of us focused who have a socioeconomic development background, we're starting to wonder how we might use it for health and for education to improve the socioeconomic quality of people's lives.
Medical training
And already
will be
working
able
with
to
Stanford
see and
Healthcare, we've
touch
come up with
a
some
living,
solutions.
beating heart right in front of them, so they will be able to have a whole new take on how to learn about the heart. We're starting with congenital heart disease, which are structural defects of the heart that people are born with. They'll be able to actually go inside the heart to see the difference between a normal heart and a structurally abnormal heart with congenital heart disease. Our virtual heart goes so far beyond what textbooks, plastic models, and even cadavers have taught medical trainees for decades. It gives them a vivid, three-dimensional sense of how the heart works and what happens when it's not working normally.
Imagine the impact of applications and services and the connectivity that facilitates them could bring to the most rural areas of Africa, and even to the urban areas and underserved areas, when we have educational services and health services that ride upon it. But this question remains, that's amazing. What about now? Our belief is that some of these technologies are for now and should be here now, but there's also lots of work we're doing to enable communities, to enable businesses, SMBs, young women, old women, youth in general, to leverage the internet to improve their lives, the outcomes, and to transform this continent. And we wouldn't want to belittle their efforts. We know from a survey we did last year that our platform is being used by numerous businesses to attract new customers, to increase revenue, all kinds of ways to improve the outcomes of SMBs. And we know that much of this continent, in fact, the business drivers of this continent, we speak about captains of industry, but there are many captains of industry who are missing again from this conference. Those small to medium business owners who go out every day, work, and create value in their economies. We've already started working with many of those, developing programs to support those businesses and to ensure that they can leverage our platform and the internet in general to deliver value to those in their families, to their customers, and to their countries. Since 2017, we've been working in 10 countries. We have 5 training partners, around 60 trainers across the continent who are consistently delivering training programs using churches and libraries as venues. Our constituents are our key audience, micro, small business owners, as I've mentioned, students, recent graduates, unemployed youth, and of course, NGOs. And this speaks to much of what the heads of government spoke about today. This is a young continent that's thirsty for opportunity and is able to use that opportunity. And Facebook is working extremely hard to ensure that they can take that opportunity when it comes. Boost Your Business is just one program that we have. She Means Business, focused on female entrepreneurs. And I spoke to a young entrepreneur from Djibouti. He said, there are so many female entrepreneurs who miss out on opportunity because they don't know how to use our platform effectively. And they want training. They want to be able to use our platform and the internet in general to create revenue and value in their lives. And these are programs that we're rolling out across Africa. And frozen. So I think that's either a sign for me to stop or that was a delay. So forgive me, there's a tiny bit more. Is there any more, Musa? So does anyone know any jokes? No? So I'm going to carry on without the slides. So there's essentially thousands of developers, around 40,000 SMBs that we've trained, and we continue to train across this continent. At the same time, what I was going to show you is some of our developer programs. And this is about enabling not just the traditional businesses that we see, the SMBs that we see selling foodstuffs and all kinds of things within our countries, but also the new, young, people who want to find opportunities in digital marketing, who want digital literacy programs to enable them to use the internet better and more effectively down the line. And our programs focused on creating innovation for Africa and in Africa. Developer circles has helped us train. We have 32 developer circles across the continent, helping us train thousands of young Africans to develop apps and services that can be used to impact this continent and transform it. Just some examples of the training that we're given using this train-the-trainer model that's so effective. An FB Start, where we're providing, on a non-equity basis, those young startups and those young entrepreneurs that want to create startup companies, equity-free funding. Many of the startups and hubs you see, if you speak to those who are developing content, apps, and services within those hubs, have actually had to sign contracts in which some of the equity, when that company goes live and it's a business model that works for some, is given up to those who enable them to use those hubs and to fund those hubs. Facebook's support, including through the hub that we've helped fund in Nigeria and elsewhere, is equity-free, and we hope and are already seeing these young entrepreneurs use these particular apps and services. I'm sorry for the breakup, but what I've tried to tell you is the connectivity challenge that we have here in Africa that is apparent and is real, but that we are working in partnership with others to tackle. I've tried to tell you about the way we're investing to eradicate, not close, that digital divide. And I've tried to tell you about the innovative tech that we think should be present here on the continent now, and indeed is for now. And then I've tried to tell you how Facebook is working with its training partners to ensure that young Africans, indeed young and old, but our focus is on young Africans, to harness the opportunities that are coming and are being created right now. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to invite some panelists up. Again, time is so short, so Sophie, could I invite you to come up? Mr. Omo, please, if I can invite you to come up as well. Chris, if you wouldn't mind joining us. And my friend, my learned friend, Mr. Imwama, please come up as well. If you could grab your seats here. So there's, I have to say we've lost one panelist actually because the program's overrunning by an hour. One of those panelists had to leave, which actually makes my job slightly easier because it means that I don't have to go through all of their bios. And I'm as you can appreciate, these people have very, very long CVs, but a short synopsis, and they've been helpful by providing a very short one as well. So I'm going to start with John because John sent me his earlier today. So John Omo is the Secretary General of the African Telecommunications Union, which is a specialized organization of the African Union that looks after communication policy and regulatory environments in Africa. the ATU is extremely important. Its convening power, bringing ministers and regulators together to discuss key issues, is extremely impactful already in so many ways. At the same time, I should say that John spent 18 years of his life with the Kenyan regulator, and much of that was spent as head of legal and on the board for the Secretariat at the same time. Chris Stork, on the other side, is a friend and colleague as well. He is a telecommunication economist who specializes in applying innovative solutions to some of the problems we face. Much of his work and most of his work has been spent on making regulation in Africa much better than it is already, working with regulators to do that. He's looked at in depth at the business models of OTTs and of operators as well, and more recently has come up with some excellent research on the impact of OTTs on operator business models, etc. Professor H. Nwana is the managing partner of Sonerva Limited, a boutique consultancy that provides support to regulatory services, regulators here in Africa, and many of the regulators who I spoke to are excited about him being here, but also in Asia and the States as well. Numerous clients, including Microsoft and MTN, to mention, so I will leave that alone. And then we have Sophie Maddens, who is the head of the Regulatory and Market Environment Division at the ITU Development Bureau. And as you know, that's an extremely important bureau for this part of the world. Sophie is a lawyer by training, has worked for regulatory institutions and policymakers across the continent, and also in Asia, the Middle East as well. So without further ado, because I made a slight hash of their bios, I'm going to move on. Again, as I said at the start, this is hopefully an interactive discussion. If you have questions about some of the content you've seen here, or also questions to put to Sophie, to John, to H, or to Chris, please do have those ready, and feel free to put your hands up at any time. My colleague Fagani will bring you a mic. So I'm going to jump into the first question, because we spoke about, and the first question I'm going to put to John, if you don't mind, John. We spoke about some of the ways in which policy environments have enabled the investments that Facebook and partners have made. And I think there's increasingly a need for the public sector and the private sector to work better together. And we heard that from the heads of state today. What ways do you feel we might be able to improve that working relationship?
Thank you very much, Kojo. And thank you for the intro. I think there is the missing link between the public and the private sector is a perception issue. The role of the public sector is essentially to ensure the social good. The private sector, of course, is the social good plus the profit motive. And much of what we've seen in terms of either licensing regimes or regulatory frameworks are essentially for governments to ensure that the social objectives of the populations are met. But there's a great deal more that I think needs to be done, and that's where the conversation takes us. How can the government unlock the potential, especially for organizations like you to do business, and also to ensure that government's social objectives are met? One, I think there's a lot of data, in my view, lying in government archives. A lot of data that, especially in Africa, talk about data about our colonial structures, our agriculture, that is lying in our government archives, that is untouched. And this is a minefield for techpreneurs. I think there's a great need for a conversation in terms of how that data can be unlocked so that it's used to ensure that we provide a lot more social good and, of course, encourage businesses to invest. The second area that I see has been an area of controversy is licensing. And, of course, governments have several objectives for which they license. One of which, of course, is to ensure that, quality of service, areas where they want services to go, services are taken to those places. Increasingly, some private and justifiably see license licensing as some handicap, in the sense that there is now a seeming drive to say, well, do you need to license, for example, a network that is basically for social good, as you license a network that is an ISP, doing business, really a commercial business, as compared to a network that is for a community? And if so, what new innovative licensing ideas we need to have on board to ensure that we encourage access to those areas? So there are a number of government initiatives that can be done in that regard, ensuring that we employ innovative ways of licensing and billing services to the public. The other area, of course, which you touched is taxation. Africa, unfortunately, has 50-something states with various taxation regimes. And taxation has, of course, been used as a means of raising government revenue, which is the reason why taxation is there. But I think there is more, quite a lot of research now to indicate that tax initially inhibits more rather than facilitates business. Let business thrive, and then tax from the revenues that are generated from the business, as opposed to taxing from the what goes, say, for raising revenue out of spectrum, for example. So there are a lot of things that the public and the private sector can work on together in terms of facilitating the social objectives for which governments are established, and also the profit and social objectives for which businesses exist. Thank you.
John, I'm excited by your answer, in part because, unlike many conversations I had, I think most of those steps, or at least those things, need to be taken by the public sector first to facilitate private sector. And that's a great position, 3 things. I know that you've probably limited that list. There's many things that we can do at the same time, but that's a great way to start. And I'm also struck by the taxation argument that you gave, because the Kenyan example, again, from 2009, and friends of mine in the room from the Alliance for Affordable Internet will know about this example well. In 2009, removing import tax on devices, they saw the demand for those tax for devices jump 200%. They saw voice penetration jump from 30 to 70%. And it continually continues to stand out as a startling example of a government that took what was really a bold step to improve connectivity, voice connectivity obviously, and actually reap dividends. Of course, there was a step back for various reasons, but it continues to stand out as an example. Sophie, as an executive, I don't know if executive is the right word, but as a senior member of an ITU bureau or department, I want to put the same question to you. In what ways might we be able to improve the working relationship between the public and the private sector?
So thanks, Kojo. And I was really happy with the discussions we heard this morning. I was happy at looking at Bob's presentation, at your presentation, and indeed at listening to John right now. But so what could an environment look like where there's greater and more effective collaboration so that we can really move to that digital transformation? Because we all know we're in the era of digital transformation. And I think it helps to also take a step back, because it's digital transformation for what?
Yeah.
ICTs for what?
Yeah.
We know, and having started my career 30 years ago, ICTs were seen as a luxury. And thanks to operators like yourselves, today ICTs are there to help bring the unbanked on board,
yeah,
to help create opportunities for youth, for gender, for women, to help bring opportunities to people with disabilities, because let's not forget the less fortunate, to be able to bring them into the digital economy as well. So I think we really need to think of that social good, as you said, John, but also the incentives for investment and for innovation. So I was actually at the UN the other day. There was the SDG Investment Forum, and I took out my notes just to answer your question. So what do we need to do? We still need to connect the other half. We still need to build skills. We need to include all, and we need the appropriate regulation. or the appropriate regulatory framework. And yes, they are government decisions, Kojo, but yes, we need to be inclusive.
Yep.
We need the evidence, we need the data,
Yep.
we need the conversations across the sectors. Because when we say ICTs for what, it's for health, it's for education, it's for agriculture. So ICTs really span across the sector, so we need that. And we need that good and appropriate regulation, flexible light touch. And let me just, five thoughts.
Please.
So we need to balance flexibility and stability, as well as innovation and investment. And that's a policy decision. How do you get that balance? But again, through conversations with the private sector. I always tell governments, be bold, act a little bit more like the private sector. Be bold, go out there and take some initiatives that partnerships with the private sector, partnerships with communities that you would not normally involve in rolling out to rural areas. I think of community networks, for example, of indigenous people. You have great examples in Mexico of the social, the social licenses, where the non-traditional stakeholders are able to build, to bring that connectivity. Be holistic and collaborative, again, across the sectors. And then collect evidence, be inclusive, and be innovative, think out of the box. I'll give you an example. How can the public and private sector work better together? One, regulatory issues that you didn't mention, John. We touched upon the licensing, you touched upon the licensing. I said think about bringing other people into the licensing and into the rollout, like community networks. Also the financing of access. We want affordable connectivity. I call upon governments, look for partnerships. Don't just rush to universal service funds. Universal service funds give me the shivers. So when you say be bold and think of innovative solutions, think of those partnerships, public-private partnerships, working with other actors, working on how to finance that investment so that you can get that affordable access. Those are just some thoughts.
I appreciate that, and I know you started almost with by reiterating John's point about this need to create social good. In my overview of H's bio, I forgot to mention H, that you were the lead regulator with Ofcom in the UK looking at spectrum policy. And on many occasions I've seen you speak to senior regulators about what the heart of regulation is, and this idea of creating social good is just one part of that. But in your view, how might we get the public and private sector to work together? What's the essence of creating a regulatory environment in order to enable that to happen?
Thank you, Kojo, and thanks to Facebook for this invitation. I'm going to really keep my remarks to two broad points. One, the will and the leadership, because I really think we should start from there. And then I'm going to talk about regulation, because practically all the challenges Kojo put on that slide, I've not seen that slide before. They were all regulatory challenges. They're all regulatory and policy challenges, and that's a big issue on this continent. But let's start with the will, something that, I speak as an African, and I'm African, I come from Cameroon, and I think we as Africans, particularly you, my African brothers and sisters in the room, we need to be honest with ourselves about certain facts. We go to the UN and we sign up to all these SDGs, which are fantastic, laudable policy goals, but frankly, we don't mean them. We really do not mean them, because there's no strategy and implementation plan behind them to make any of those things realistic in those countries. And we keep shifting the targets. So it is really important, please, that we really, when we sign up to these targets, when we look at the sort of data that Dr. Pepper put up there, and we go up to actually try and address some of these problems, we must mean it. In places like Kenya, President Kagame means it. And you can see the difference here in Kigali and here in Rwanda. In places like Kenya, they mean it in Kenya, and you see the difference. But I don't want to name and shame many other countries across the African continent where they absolutely do not mean it. Because you can't go and sign an SDG for 2020 when you have not a scintilla of a broadband plan and any evidence on how you're going to particularly achieve that particular plan across the continent. And so that really is a bit of a rant on my part, but I think it's very important. So it's a really important rant. And then let's go to the area of regulation. You see, every sector, Kojo says I used to be senior director, regulator in the UK, I ran competition for some time as well. Every sector is run by 5 key factors: technology, consumers, behavior, consumer behavior in general, the industry where we're operating in, macroeconomy, and regulation. But regulation is one of the most important things that we really fail on this continent of Africa. And as long as we continue to fail on regulation, frankly, all the SDGs we sign up to and all the things that we're talking about transforming Africa is going to come to naught. So just look at some of the data I've just seen here today. So as an evidence-based regulator, I try and look at the evidence. What did Dr. Pepper tell us? That the divide at the bottom of the pyramid is even getting wider. How many of the regulators in the room are going to get up and sit up and take notice and say, I'm going to go back to my respective countries, and in my 3-year annual plan, there's going to be a very clear target to try and do something about that particular problem. It says Sub-Saharan Africa, poor internet connectivity, we knew that already, 47%. Too expensive, 22%. Content not being relevant to us, 29%. That tells us to go do something. But how many regulators actually leave the room and go and do something about this sort of data? DRC, network performance. Nigeria, quality of service. Nigeria's always had quality of service issues. So it's not, that will not be news to them. So they really should be dealing with that. And so from really a regulatory perspective, do not forget, the ICT handbook tells all of us very clearly, there are 4 key things we're trying to address with good regulation. 1, you want to avoid market failures. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, I see a lot of market failures in the telecoms industry here in Africa. It's too many. I can go through country by country. You see countries where it started with six operators, they're now down to 1, 1.5, etc. Soon you're going to start seeing prices going up, monopoly type intentions in those markets. That's the reality when it happens when you don't regulate properly. Second, you want to promote competition. You really want to promote competition properly. I see competition failing in many markets on the continent. I'm sad to say, it's true. Thirdly, you want to definitely drive consumer policy to make sure that consumers are not being scammed. That obviously goes without saying. That's why regulators are there. And then fourthly, and most importantly, because of the sort of market failures we have in Africa, particularly here on this particular continent, you really want to push for inclusion. Inclusion means the market has stopped working and you need to intervene in the marketplace somehow to get those other people who will never be connected to be connected. That's what the regulation is trying to do. And my brothers and sisters, unless we really start trying to regulate properly on this continent, we are not going to go very far.
Thank you so much. It's a worrying story, but I know we have good examples on the continent, and we have ones that are less good. What did the moderator say? There's top of the class or an A grade, and then there's a B grade. So we'll put the others in the B grade. Chris, I want to throw a question at you, and we've heard some of the threats that H has identified, and also that very diplomatically John and both Sophie have spoken to as well in steps that we can take to improve things. What do you see as the biggest threat to greater connectivity, to creating this transformed Africa that we want and we're trying to drive?
First of all, I would like to say that I loved your video clips.
Thank you.
And it showed one important thing, that for these young entrepreneurs selling hats online, they need 3 things. They need connectivity, they need the ability to pay and receive payments, and they need some kind of identification system. So these 3 platforms are needed for them to thrive.
I also think they need a day off. She works from Monday to Friday in the cafe, and from Saturday and Sunday making hats. So I think a day off is deserved at the same time. So 4 things. But sorry, go on.
But the networks of families are large, and they often can't afford to take a day off. Because there's always demands that we have to cater for. But then if we think about governments are there to produce a conducive environment for making sure that these platforms work ideally. And the biggest threat that currently I'm seeing in Africa is the misunderstanding that the government doesn't realize how important the ICT sector is for economic growth and social inclusion, and that the ICT sector instead is being used as an easy tax handle, as a way of extracting extra money, extra finances to fill some gaps. And also from the regulatory side, we have a risk. And what we see in Africa is a transition. And while 1G brought us voice, and 2G brought us SMS, 2.5G brought us data, and 3G is about faster data, 4G is about faster data, 5G is about faster data. So we have a transition from the circuit-switched voice and SMS business models to a data-only business model. And if governments and regulators fail not to see this transition, they are not regulating properly, as H referred to. And there's many implications for regulators. For example, if now OTTs become a substitute for regular voice services, it doesn't need to mean that OTTs need to be regulated now, but actually the opposite, that voice and SMS need now only to be regulated less. Because once they are substitutes, they are no longer having a call termination monopoly, but now it's competition, and one can ease the regulation. But often regulators get lobbied by operators claiming that they are losing revenues to voice and SMS, but these are often short-sighted arguments, not looking at the whole picture. For example, you have a country where some operators are complaining, 2 operators make more money than before, 2 operators make less money than before. They clearly can have nothing to do with OTTs. And then maybe operators say we are losing SMS revenues, even though Safaricom, for example, has now more voice revenues and SMS revenues than ever before. But some operators claim, yes, we're losing SMS revenues, but fail to report that they're actually making much more now on data. So there's a process of self-cannibalization. And we are used to think of fixed lines as incumbents. But in today's world, actually, mobile operators are the incumbents. They are trying to defend their business model from the last millennium, and we're refusing to adjust or try to maintain it as long as they can, and don't want to adjust to new business models. But we see with Jio in India that there's no turning back. There will be a transition, and the sooner they engage in it and change the business model, the more sustainable operators will be.
I've been struck. I was struck by this ITU decision or report that suggested that the OTT is a substitute for MNO services, and I know there's a difference between what the EU has said as well, its BEREC decision, and the way it differentiates OTT at the same time. I'm also struck by this argument that you've made in your paper about revenues and how OTT is impacting upon operator revenues. And we hear a lot about operators saying they're losing money, they're losing money, they're losing money. Your report clearly says that some operators are losing money. Those operators who remain focused on voice, despite the fact that governments are now focused on the SDGs and connecting people, are not making as much money as before because of, unfortunately, services like ours and many others. Whereas those operators, and thankfully we have a number of them on the continent, your report suggests that those operators who have made a decision, just as Jio did in India, that 4G or 3G, 4G is the future, connecting helping governments to connect the country to internet connectivity is what they should be doing, what they are doing, and they're investing in doing so. Your report suggests that they're making more money, at least from data revenues, than they were before, and actually revenues are growing. And I've been super interested in that finding. And I think it would be great if we could dig into that with the audience and some operators. Sophie, I know your time is super tight. John, the same. I know you have this EU-AU meeting. I'm going to throw a quick question at Sophie regarding capacity building. I think I spoke about some of the ways in which Facebook and its partners capacity building with SMBs and developers and all that kind of stuff. And I know from attending WTDC and many other ITU meetings that when it comes to government stakeholders, both ministries, policymakers in general, they look to the ITU for capacity building. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is needed to create the capacity to enable policymakers and regulators to deal with these new realities? Companies like ours, the challenge that Pepper has identified, the need to transform this continent. It's a myriad of challenges, and I'm wondering what do you think is needed to give them the capacity to do that?
So, first of all, if in terms of capacity building, what needs to be done in terms of building capacity so that people around the world can benefit from the digital economy? And there, His Excellency, the President of Kenya, this morning said it right. You need to add it to the curriculum, and you need to make sure that you build the digital skills. Adding to the curriculum brings us to the point how to build capacity of regulators. Well, one of the things I think regulators need to understand, it's not just about writing laws, it's about implementing them. Implementation, implementation, implementation. So there are certain regulatory tools and mechanisms, internal procedures, decision-making procedures, public consultations, that regulators in many countries still need to get better at. So we at ITU, we have worked in ECOWAS, for example. In the year 2000 to 2008, we worked on regional harmonization of regulatory text, and we accompanied that with capacity building, really teaching the regulators about some of the regulatory mechanisms, the functions, and how to execute those functions, but also about what John mentioned, some of the regulatory tools, such as licensing, quality of service, interconnection, numbering, and some of the regulatory issues. What do we offer at ITU, for example, in terms of regulator capacity building? We have regulator exchanges and platforms through our study groups, through our Global Symposium for Regulators, which is an annual event in which we will take place from the 9th to the 12th of July in Vanuatu, where we'll talk about inclusive connectivity and the future of regulation. So through these exchange platforms, this networking, this peering, and this discussion of topical regulatory issues. We also have our centers of excellence that provide training on the regulatory issues and also on some of the regulatory functions, the ITU Academy, and through special initiatives such as, for example, like the Girls in ICT Day, where we have Girls Can Code, where we share experience and learning on some of the digital skills that can help people benefit from the digital economy. So that's just in a nutshell. And I really apologize, but I have to run to this EU-AU Digital Economy Task Force, and these acronyms are killing me these days.
At least you've got it.
Okay.
At least you've got it the right. At least you've got it the right way round. I do AU, EU first, but maybe EU, AU is the right way.
Actually, I'll wait for John. 'Cause John
If
is
you're gonna wait for John, that's great. So John, do you wanna make a?
I want to assume I know the question that was coming to me next.
You often do.
Yeah. Let me take from where Prof left. I'm 4 months old in the job, and interacting with our regulators in Africa as well as policymakers, you get the issue that sort of challenges our biggest challenge, not so much to be a regulatory issue, Prof. It is the first one that you didn't hit hard enough, the political goodwill. Most of regulatory practices, especially those that have been developed through the ITU systems, are similar. The standards in terms of quality of service, how you license, are more or less, same standards. And how you apply light touch approach, they are basically the same. But something to do with the market failures, whether it's in North Africa or South Africa or East Africa, you'll get the issue that regulators have tended to deal with the issue. But the political will to ensure that the issue is carried to conclusion is oftentimes what is lacking. And why? Because those companies that are associated with you and me and our political system. And so I see a greater need, and this is Kojo, where I come in for you. I see a greater need for more dialogue with policymakers in terms of how we need to intervene at a policy level to ensure that we truly transform Africa through regulatory processes, because those processes oftentimes fall into place after, the policy that informs those regulatory processes. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that Africa's narrative is being told differently. And it pretty much depends on who is telling that narrative and for what reasons. Let's admit it. Africa's narrative is being told differently depending on who is telling that story and for what reasons. And I think there's a high time that Africans start telling their stories. And so this is where capacity building comes in. And we are seeing increasingly a pool of Africans being able to tell their stories in an African setting for Africans. And so, because my fear is most of you, I see faces that were with me in Dubai in October last year, and some of the issues are explained. Why would there be a difference in a geopolitical difference in terms of a community network? It is basically because the way the North is telling that narrative is more, this is what we think you Africans need, as opposed to Africans saying, this is what we think we need. So we need to change the way the narrative is told and let Africans tell their narrative. Because we've licensed community broadcasting networks in Africa through very innovative models. Why can't that extend to telcos? I didn't see much of an initiative from the North for licensing community broadcasting networks. The Africans developing countries just decided this is something that we think is good because the narrative was told from a developing country's perspective. So some of the way we tell the narrative is what brings geopolitical differences and leads to regulatory challenges that we often have. I'm sorry, I also must leave because...
Can I ask, Sophie promised to give 3 minutes.
Okay.
But then Doreen phoned. I saw Doreen phone, so 3 is Sophie's boss.
The AU commissioner is my boss.
Yeah, no.
And she's chairing the meeting.
Can I just ask,
Prof will take my questions.
John, thank you so much. So I know it's late, and I've never been one to overstay my welcome, but I do want to just leverage the expertise of these two for one, maybe a couple of specific questions. I'm hoping for prompt answers, and if we do generate any questions from the audience, please do put your hands up. We had on my wonderful briefing note a question about what you see as the we used to say killer app, didn't we? Killer app for Africa, and I think we had many of those now. But what do you see as the new tech that's going to help us move forward on this continent? What might there be? And my presentation had VR and VI and all kinds of stuff. But what might you think is going to move this continent forward?
Maybe the new tech that I see is not really new tech. It's just like the tech of the last 10 years for everybody. So for example, when we talk about education and ICT skills, 10 years ago it was about PC driver licenses, learning how to use a computer. Today it's peer-to-peer learning. And this peer-to-peer learning is only possible if there's no risk for, if I want to learn something, now suddenly I lose all my money because it's very expensive. So we need to have like something like free basics, free internet, for people across Africa to have the ability to learn how to use it, to experiment with it. So when I talk about the risks through the transformation of Africa, it's at the same time also an opportunity. So for any country that sees that there's this opportunity, they could incentivize an operator to come into the market, one that operates based on the geo-style model, that then only provides data services and forgets about voice and SMS, and potentially also offers free internet on a maybe slower speed, so that people can get onto the internet and try it for themselves. So today we see 2-year-olds using iPads and smartphones of their parents in airports, and which was something which was unheard of in the age of computers, where you needed to have electricity at home, a very expensive device, you need to have a job to be able to get the internet connectivity, or you had to go to an internet cafe. Today it's everywhere, for those who can afford it, but still, vast majorities of Africans cannot afford it. And if we have a country like Zambia or Rwanda, where only 20% of the people have internet access, how can we serve them with e-government, e-health services? Then we can only reach 20%. So the big innovations I can't foresee, but I know they will arise once we can get everyone connected.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I think the presentation that I tried to, the points I tried to make in the presentation is that connectivity needs to be there. I think the builds in Uganda, the builds in Nigeria all speak to that, but there is this opportunity out there. And if we can get a company like Geo who's going to move the needle, and we do have this connectivity, and I'm not sure everybody wants to hear that you get operators that only provide data and no voice and SMS, and I'd love to dig into the business model for that. But if we do get a company that decides it wants to move the needle in that way, and governments that decide to facilitate that, I think the opportunities are numerous. Of course you can.
And governments can facilitate this process. So one could, for example, award a new license and say, if you provide a data-only business model with premium internet, we give you your spectrum at half the price. Or you don't have to pay license fee for 3 years. Or we give you a very specific license. One can also say, like, only a company that provides the services and this business model will have very potent spectrum. So there's a lot of regulatory issues that one can, and tools that one can use to facilitate such a company to come to the market.
Thanks, Chris. H, the same question to you.
If you don't mind, Koji, I'd just like to, the SG made the point of political will, which I made, so that's, we agreed on that. The reason why I keep going back to regulation is regulation 101, and a lot of the stuff that we've got from the IT is fantastic. But don't forget that most of that was generated and they have worked in developed markets. The reason I make this difference is private value regulation. So you regulate for consumers in your market, typically, and then practically every citizen in the market gets those services. That's what I did in London, because more citizens, citizens in the United Kingdom and in developed market are already consumers. I want you to know that distinction. A consumer is somebody who is actually paying out of his or her wallet every month to consume some sort of an ICT service. A citizen is somebody who also enjoys that service. Like you could, let me give you a simple example. I pay for the television service in my home, so I'm the consumer, but my whole family enjoys those services, so it provides them citizen value. Can you see that distinction? The distinction about Africa in general, and I want regulators in the room to understand that, is that there are less consumers, there are more citizens in Africa who are not consumers than is in the case in the Europe and United States. So it means it makes my life slightly easier as a regulator in the United Kingdom, because I know that if I regulate for consumers, I can cover practically 95% of the citizens of the United Kingdom. That is not the case in Africa. If you regulate for consumers in Africa, you hit 30, 40%, and then 60% of the population is not covered. So you now need to think about regulation differently across our continent, because you now need to regulate more for citizen value. So there's more citizen value regulation that needs to be done on this continent than we need to do across the other continents. And that is the very important distinction that you need to make. So when I see some of the things that Facebook has just mentioned today, and I just go to that presentation, by the way, that's one of your best presentations from Facebook I've ever seen about connectivity on this continent. That was brilliant, honestly. It covered a lot of really good ground that I've not seen you cover before. The reason that's quite important is If you know, you get up in the morning and you know that 60%, 70% of your citizens, your regulations are not going to impact because they live in the rural areas, you have to be spending more time thinking about how your policies are going to impact the people who live in the rural areas. And the way it does it is I want to jump at things like some of the things that Kojo mentioned. How do you have base stations in the rural areas which do not cost $125,000 to $150,000? How do we use some of the telecom infra base stations, which is coming out of the telecom infra project, which probably will end up in the region of $10,000 to $25,000? Then that improves the economics of being able to provide connectivity in rural areas. So this is why I'm really insisting a lot that the regulation that has got the United Kingdom and Europe and North America to where it is today is not the regulation that's going to get us to transform Africa. And that's a really key important point that I was trying to make. Or another way of bluntly putting it is that the way I regulate the United Kingdom is not the way I would regulate if I was the chief regulator of Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think there's consensus on the need for social value. There's consensus on the need to focus on consumers there's a need to focus on social value. There's a need to focus on consumers, as wide a consumer base as we can create on this continent, not just those who are consuming already as well. And I think there's consensus between everybody on that, which is excellent.
But if there is, how come we don't prioritize what I'll call utility projects?
So I think there's consensus, but I think one of the things we've found here and that we discussed here was that actually we have written many good policies and regulations, and we've all signed up to the SDGs. We should all be focused on trying to achieve universal access to broadband internet or working towards it by 2020, and hopefully by 2030 everybody's connected.
And you're going to do that when 600 million Africans are in the dark every night?
And there are many other aspects. So we haven't spoken about energy and all those kinds of things, but I think that there is consensus that we need to be doing more on that. And as I said, there's a A grade class and there's a B grade class. I was often in the C grade class, but there's a class for both. Are there any immediate questions? I know it's late. There's one at the back, Jean-Francois, and I see a gentleman here as well, and a gentleman here. I'm going to have these as the last three questions because I think I am now standing between maybe a drink or going home and something to eat. So I'll make these the three questions. JF, please.
Hi, I joined a little bit late. I was in another session and I may have missed something. But I wanted to come to that a bit, the statement about operators remaining on voice and investment needed on 3G, 4G to be able to stimulate the data consumption that would make MNO profitable. I think we were just at the end of the quarterly results of most of the mobile network operators, so we could compare a little bit the financial results, which were very different from one operation to another, one group to another. I don't think we see a lot of mobile network operators that focus on voice and think that voice is their future. I think it has been widely acknowledged and data is where the new revenues will come. And I think the challenge of the industry is rather how do you transition from one to the other. Voice revenues are decreasing, or for those that are able to grow them is usually based on a very fine segmentation and being able to make offers that are providing more value to consumers. And here, for example, regulation can be an obstacle. So I think referring to regulatory concepts that have been imported on the continent, one of them is that uniformity of the territory, whereby the same price should apply everywhere. This is most probably a hurdle that needs to be overcome in a prepaid market. In a prepaid, because there is no fidelity to a particular service provider. Most of the people have more than one SIM, and they will go for the best package and the best temporary offer. There needs to be flexibility there, and we see some regulatory authorities that are a bit not sure on how to track what is exactly the price. We look at rack rates and not blended rates, so the average price that you pay in a package. Therefore, I think this is important to see that some of the regulation needs to be relaxed, most probably, to bring the value to the consumer. And on data uptake, I think it's interesting to see that maybe the divide that is sometimes seen between OTT and mobile operators don't apply as much in Africa than it does in other regions. The experience around Facebook Flex, where you try to go from a zero-rated service to a paying service for a premium service, so therefore accessing the basic Facebook content is free, but if you want to see the pictures and the video, you will pay for it, because this is where the consumer will consider there is value. I think most of the mobile operators have seen value in that partnership and think there is a way to increase data uptake. So I just wanted to give some examples to go a little bit away from a black and white approach or voice and the business model of mobile operators and how data revenues. 3G, 4G investments are important, but let's not forget that there is a huge usage gap in Africa. So where Africans have smartphones in their pocket, there is 3G, but they're not yet necessarily using much data because of digital skills challenges. And I think here, this is where most probably different part of the industry, internet service providers, platforms, and mobile operators can partner better to drive that data uptake and the revenues that need to make the business model of mobile operators sustainable.
Those are great points, and those of us who have been in the room would have seen the presentation that I made that spoke about these partnerships and the way in which Facebook is working with, and Jean-Francois, as the director for Africa for GSMA, is working with many of these mobile operators to drive usage at the same time, and these partnerships are ever so important. But I don't know if
maybe just to respond, so we are tracking prices for 135 countries in the world, mostly the global south, and we see that operators manage this transition by offering prepaid bundles. And the prepaid bundle makes a prepaid customer similar to a postpaid customer. So if you get your consumer to recharge 5 times in a month for X amount, then you have a kind of constant ARPU, and this is then a transition to a data access model, which would also be a constant ARPU. So that generally happens. And we see that there's sometimes a negative impact by regulators on mobile operators. So there's a few countries in Africa that actually see declining revenues overall, but this is because their 3G license is issued too late, or there's other challenges so that they can't monetize on data. But wherever the environment is such that they can monetize on data and can invest in 3G and 4G, mobile operators, if they lose money, then this is then due to economic shocks or bad business decisions, competition issues, and so forth. But it's OTTs that actually drives the demand for data. And this is one thing that we have to recognize, that if we want data to grow, if we want to facilitate this transition, then we have to think of a way of how to integrate them in our business models.
And I think lots of governments are thinking that, and the flexibility that JF is calling for, I think, is apparent in some markets. I also think there are challenges being created in others. So even with the use of bundles, we see in some markets governments introducing price floors, for example, to ensure a consistent price for per megabyte of data that takes away the flexibility that some mobile operators are desperate to have and then to drive demand with, to make this transition to drive demand with. Lambre, I'm going to have to, you're my friend, you're my old guy. I usually would come to you first, but this guy asked first, and then the gentleman at the back. So I'm going to take this question, and I'll come to you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Christian Bope. My question, I would like to ask the question to Kojo. Yes. Just related to your presentation. You have deployed more than 200 optical fiber in Uganda and in Nigeria. I just want to understand what is the benefit for Facebook to be embarked in such a optical fiber deployment? And secondly, we have been discussing about the cost of internet in Africa. Does that project also help to reduce the cost? Thank you.
Yeah, the benefits, I hope you also hear at the start. I think Facebook is focused on all the universal access targets that governments and indeed operators are focused on at the same time. I think our investments speak to that and build to that, and I think our founder has a personal belief. Many multi-billionaires want to leave a legacy. I think our founder has a personal belief that connecting the world and connecting everyone is something he can leave behind. But I make no bones about it that actually the growth of our company requires greater connectivity at the same time. Facebook, as you know, doesn't charge for access to or usage of its applications. Our money is an advertising model, and we can speak after about how that works. We are fairly confident that most people who use the internet will eventually or should use a Facebook application. So if we work with mobile operators in partnership to roll out these kind of fiber projects, it's a benefit to us, most certainly a benefit to the country, but also a benefit to our partners at the same time, because we're helping to reduce a problem shared is a problem halved. And if you have 2 people, then you halve it. If you have 4, then quarterize it isn't a word, but you cut it into 25%. And many of those mobile operators can then take the savings that those projects have enabled them to make, and then to go and invest in connecting more people, and to go through this transition that Jean-Francois has mentioned, to roll out more 3 and 4G base stations. It benefits them, they get more users, governments meet their penetration targets, just as the government of Nigeria has recently met a target it had set its heart on 5 years ago, and Facebook grows at the same time, as well as creates these social benefits that we believe are so important to transforming Africa at the same time. So it's one of those rare occasions, and it becomes cliche, but it's one of those rare occasions where it's a win-win-win-win-win.
I think I'll just add to that. There's always a demand side and the supply side. So a lot of time we're talking presentations about supply side issues like spectrum, like building networks, etc., and stuff like that. But in Africa, the demand side is exceedingly important. And the reality is, I don't know any other company, not because I'm saying this because I'm here in front of Facebook. I don't know any other company which has such a significant impact on the demand side of the usage of data than Facebook. That's just the reality in terms of Messenger, Facebook, itself, WhatsApp, etc. So it is absolutely economically naive when you start taxing the demand side in Africa. So I don't even care about the clever economists like this sitting to my left. It is just regulatorily and policy naive to be taxing the demand side of the equation when our numbers are down and we're trying to meet those SDGs. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say as well is I think it's really important to your question that it's important when you work with companies like Facebook where connectivity actually is built into their long-term survival, into their long-term business model. So it really aligns. It completely aligns in the case of Facebook. That's not the case in certain other companies that I can talk about, but in the case of Facebook, and in the case of Africa, we should be encouraging them to come and do some of the sort of projects that they're doing, because it's not as if these guys are making a lot of money out of Africa. They're probably making less than 1% of their, I suspect, less than 1% of their revenue from this particular continent, and you're putting in all that sort of work. So companies like Facebook are a significant net positive across this continent, and we really should be trying to bring them here more.
So I should say, as I said to others, I think you're right, H, and I can't give the number. Our revenues are super slim here and certainly investing much more, but I will say that we are a business at the same time, and we have an inherent belief in this continent. We have an inherent belief of and I said this once, and someone said it's not innate, but the innate ability of Africans to seize opportunity once it's given to them. And if we create opportunity by bringing connectivity in partnership with the mobile operators like Airtel, who we showed here, providers like BCS, like Main One, and many other mobile operators who are interested in the connectivity work that we're doing and we're working with, then we can create that opportunity. Madame, I'm going to take the gentleman here, then I'll take Lanray, and I'm going to make you the last question. And then the guy in Burgundy just asked, so I'll make you the penultimate question, and then the guy in the lovely Burgundy kaftan, the final question.
Okay.
Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Kojo. I have 2 questions, but first of all, my name is Ayodeji.
What I'll say, before you say your name, if you have 2 questions, you got up and you asked for 1. So if you have 2, okay, then both need to be succinct for all of us.
Okay, my name is Ayodeji Agbola from Nigeria. I'm with Digivate 360, one of the partners training for Facebook in Nigeria.
Nice to meet you.
So I was very happy to see Boost Your Business and She Means Business on the screen when you were presenting.
We almost lost it.
Yeah, we've trained about 20,000 business owners in Nigeria in 2018, and then that project is still going on in 2019. Now, my question is around the first presentation that Dr. made. If Rwanda has so much connectivity on the 4G, like you said, then why is the problem of the backhaul, which I think is made from the fiber, why is that? That's my first question. And second question, just put it in, is isn't it possible to, because training is a very, I mean, skills, digital skills is one of the things that, you know, we've recognized as one of the things to move the continent forward. How can we take this learning content, learning material, and use technology to just, I mean, you're talking about free basics. I don't see that learning content on free basics yet.
Yeah.
And I believe that, I mean, with number of mobile phones in Africa, the internet penetration, learning content has to be prioritized on these free basics or all of these networks that are already available. How can we do that? Those are my questions.
You know what? I'm gonna call on someone who you may have seen in the video. So Ibrahima, sorry to call on you off the cuff. Ibrahima is actually in charge of some of our network investments. And I could give you a great answer, as could Pepper. But Ibrahima is actually on the ground making these investments, critical to the Uganda build with Airtel BCS, critical to the build with Main One, and hopefully critical to many more builds across the continent. So I'll let you answer this 4G question and why it's so important to have effective backhaul, Ibrahima.
Thanks, Kojo, for putting me on the spot here. So it's a good question. To be honest with you, I'm not very familiar with the Rwandan sort of infrastructure. What I know is, you know, a couple of things. Rwanda did something interesting, which is it had the wholesale 4G, which actually came separate from the mobile infrastructure. So I think we have to look at the connection between that wholesale and the mobile sort of service. It's true, like when I look at my phone here, I get mostly 3G, but we know there is a 4G infrastructure. Now, you can always theoretically put a 4G tower, but the capacity is the issue, and building that infrastructure takes time, and it's expensive, as you've seen sort of in the videos. But I know there is a backbone. It may just need way more than that. And there is also, like in Africa, there's a lot of the stuff when we talk about like fiber infrastructure, the initial builds are just like big cities. But what's really important is you have to densify the network. So there is a lot more like smaller roads that you have to build. So I'm sort of guessing there is still more work to be done on that area.
Right, thanks, Ibrahima. Does that work? And then the FBS part, I think you're absolutely right. I think the fact that Facebook has made FBS open to all developers, we actually support developers in creating content, means that it does beg the question why more educational content isn't there. But it's also demand driven. So if you look at even the depiction of the version of FBS we had, which is up with, I think that was the MTN version that we had up there, that's what people are demanding. So Jobberman, Wikimedia, these Nigerian-driven services are what people are demanding at the moment. We need to create demand for that educational and training content. I should also add, as you have probably found out in the field, that there's a level of literacy required to deal with some text-based content. And that's why I actually think the Oculus tech, which seems to be so forward-thinking and modern, and I said has to be here now with the help of good connectivity, could become so important to this educational and health segment to get around some of the challenges. But I think it's a great question. Lambre, sir. Thank you for your pressure.
Listen. Okay, good evening, everyone. And good to be here. Sorry we were late. We wanted to come support you. But also to ask you a very tough question. So for us in Nigeria, and I caught a bit of the conversation, I think the way we see access to broadband internet is as an essential commodity to actually create prosperity. We see the absolute connection to economic growth. But the big question we ask ourselves is, how do we achieve ubiquitous broadband penetration in Nigeria within a foreseeable period? Yeah, you know, I heard you talk about NCC got this whole dramatic number, you know, I'm not sure. I'm talking of reality because I don't hide it, because the reality is we need to see connectivity. For a lot of startup companies that you see in Nigeria, they're limited by broadband penetration. For all the great stories we're talking about here, it's limited. If we don't have broadband, we're just talking, right? So, in partnership with Facebook, and I think you were very humble when you said, you guys just is living a legacy. No, there's a massive business case for you, and I don't have any issues against that. I think I want you to be successful while we are successful. Nigeria in particular, and I think in Africa, average age 18 years, massive growth opportunity, untapped numbers, which means a great deal to you. And that's fine, because in your success, so we will be successful. How can we work together? I mean, what do you see as a solution to really achieving this ubiquitous broadband in Nigeria? Not fancy numbers, real reality. Because today, we're reaching it across Nigeria. We have loads of services that we're trying to use technology to deliver. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So the numbers that are being quoted means nothing to me. If we cannot really, if it doesn't work, let's know. So how do we make it happen? I know you guys are looking to do a whole lot of things. We can take some of this offline, but it's a serious conversation that we want to have in the next 4 years.
Amen. The questions continue, but
Completely amen to your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Lanre should introduce himself as well. Lanre, you should introduce yourselves.
Sorry.
Because you said it. I didn't want to say.
No.
I questioned the 30% as well, but I didn't want to say it.
So I advise the president of Nigeria on technology, and we are really aiming to adopt technology as a way forward in achieving a lot of challenges that we have. So looking at real partners that want to make an impact for the long term is what we're seeking.
So Lambre, before you were here, one of the videos that I showed the audience was the video of the build with Main 1, Ogun and Ogun State. Super quick, rolled out, and as you said, that's a foundation. The connectivity, once it's there, will create opportunity. We also tried to show, and you're well aware of this, the number of SMBs and et cetera that Facebook has trained, as well as some of the new tech that we're trying to ensure countries like Nigeria have just at the same time as America and UK and whoever else has. I don't actually think it's rocket science. I think the way to get there, to have the connectivity, to provide people with the skills to seize the opportunity, and then hopefully to create opportunity at the same time. So I'm gonna give some to H, and I'm gonna take the first one. This is a challenge that we see, and our intention is to invest more in Nigeria. His Excellency, when he met Mark, encouraged it. The Vice encouraged it as well. What we've seen as a major challenge, and I'll just maybe touch upon one, is the rights of way. Again, not rocket science to you. It was in Broadband Plan 213, 218, and where you had the smart states, what they called smart states, that signed, the initial 5 that signed up and said, we're going to do it, we still met challenges. So that rights of way issue, I think, is the biggest hurdle for us, understanding that, ironing that out, getting local governments and state governments to also understand where we're going and the benefit that will come. And I'd love to show you the video, because the state governor there gets it, rights of way, the right price, just come and invest, because we know what comes after. But getting that across all 36 and the FCT is, all 36 states, the rest of the audience, and the FCT is, for me, at this current time, probably the biggest challenge at this current time. Still the rights of way issue. Yeah, the willingness on our part and on the part of our partners, whether that be Main 1 or many of the mobile operators we're talking to in Nigeria, the willingness is there and beyond there, and it's beyond Nigeria. The willingness to invest is there in the spectrum. I think there continues to be challenges. I'm going to get to H in a minute. There continues to be challenges with spectrum, whether it's accusations of hoarding spectrum by some mobile operators or holding spectrum licenses and not using them by others. That a challenge does seem to be there with spectrum, at least when we speak to the private sector. But I'm going to hand over to H as well, because I know H is...
I'm just going to be very brief. Larry, my brother, I'm glad you're where you are right now, so I know you're right. Nigeria's like my second country. Every time people hear my name, no one, they say, oh, you come from Abia State. I just say yes, okay. Look, the biggest will I find in Nigeria, which I think is in your hands, is a political will. I'm sorry to tell you that. And I've been seeing that for the past 10 years. The political will really needs to be there with a very clear sponsor in Nigeria saying we want to do this. Because there's no shortage of competence or excellence or ideas in Nigeria. There isn't. It could be in many, many other countries. I'm coming to the second point. The second point around investment, international investors. I do a lot of public speaking and talk to a lot of analysts. There is a degree of perception right now about investing in Nigeria, particularly around some of the things that happen around Nine Mobile, but let's take that offline, and dominance, etc., and stuff like that. But let's pick that offline. But I don't think that's the issue. To me, the biggest issue in Nigeria, spectrum policy, yes. The biggest issue is please just get the right sponsorship in Nigeria, and Nigeria will start flying. I'll give you some simple things. There's more fiber between, I did some work on this, there's more fiber between Lagos and Abuja to carry all the traffic in Africa by 150 times over, right? But there's not enough fiber between Adamawa to Kano. That's crazy. So that has just not been thought through, the backbone in Nigeria. So somebody should just really take the evidence and take a very clear political will to say we're going to really do this, and you're going to start seeing the answers up in Nigeria much faster than you think.
Hi, my name is Amy Marks. I'm the CEO of Excite Modular. I'm also the chairman of the Standards Committee for Edge Data Centers for OpenIX in the US. I have a very different perspective on some of the things that people are talking about because I'm a builder. I'm really not in fiber optics. I'm not in wireless. I didn't come out of the tech world. I'm a builder. And we do build for Facebook. We're a certified women-owned business. We've been all over the world doing all these types of buildings. My one observation that I will share with you is that, you know, we saw Facebook actually rent space in data centers in the beginning, and now they own their own data centers. And then we saw them take capacity on subsea systems, and now they own their own subsea systems. And what they're leaving for now, which is fantastic in Africa, is a piece of the pie of all these subsea systems for the incumbent telecom or the partner telecom company to actually monetize in some way. The one piece I think is missing from this education and the skills that we're talking about, because you don't have capacity in a lot of locations, is I talk to these guys on the street and they don't actually know how to monetize their piece of it, not understanding what the capacity is. And in the same breath, someone tells them they need a giant data center like the ones they do in London or the ones they do in the US. And they don't really, look, I don't want anyone on this continent to have bad containers that don't last for 3 years, or a giant data center, or even a mid-sized data center that's empty, because that's why you have guys going out of business. They actually don't know how to take this amazing opportunity that Facebook and others are bringing to them and make money from it small enough to start small enough, because some of them are very experienced, obviously some of the ones you've mentioned, but some are not. And if you want to reach the 56 countries, I say that I look out for the small guys, but the 56 countries in Africa, you're going to have to educate some of these partners and some of these locations how to be successful with the piece that they have, that this is like almost winning the lottery and not knowing how to cash your ticket. But you can't cash it so big if you don't have capacity. So I will just tell you that I speak to those guys, and it's a gap in the market, right? Because by the way, everyone on all these committees for all these leads for all these countries, there's rarely, if ever, I see anyone who's a builder of infrastructure. They are all IT guys, wireless guys, policymakers. There are very few, if any, builders. And that is a big part of this for Africa. You have more young people. By the way, in the subsea industry, we are stale, male, and pale. Do you know what that means? We have men over 55 that are white, and they really, their time is gone. You have the number one resource. Sorry, Pepper. Sorry. You have the number one resource here in the world that we don't have anywhere else. You have youth. But don't throw away this opportunity by not educating the actual guys on the street. So what are you doing in all of these things to talk to that guy that wants to build a 3 megawatt data center that probably needs 150 kilowatt space right now that he can scale? Because that's what's going to happen. You'll have a lot of empty data center spaces. I see a lot of them even in the United States. So that's my question. Sorry.
Question or statement or is opportunity. Yeah, and I think we're doing that. I think I could have spoken about it. I think you're absolutely right, but I think at the same time, part of the reason for the fiber builds is that we're working with African companies and they bring a hell of a lot of expertise, but at the same time, we're bringing learnings to them at the same time. I could have had teams who work on the caches that we have here, the points of presence that we have on the continent that will speak to you about how we work with IXPs to ensure that they make the right decisions about the edge technologies they bring in. So 100% agree with you, 100% agree with the need to leverage what is probably this continent's biggest asset, which is its youth and its vigor at the same time, and would love to speak to you offline about the things we're doing, as would some of the colleagues in the room. There's a gentleman in a burgundy kaftan. I need to take his question, and then... Oh, sorry, H.
Look, I really completely agree with you. Before I became a regulator, I used to be CEO of an infrastructure company. And infrastructure, as you know, require long-term returns, almost annuity-type, pension-type funds invest in that. The comment I'll make, and I wanted to take this offline with Landry, but you've provoked me to make the comment to some degree, is you had a fantastic entrepreneur on the screen there called Funke, who is the CEO of Min1. Right? Of course, she had to raise international capital to build all that backbone that she's building right now in Nigeria and all the metro fiber. But she started building that more than 10 years ago. She had a clear business plan to which she was building that too. If you end up with less than its single digits traffic utilization of a network, do you think there'll be any more interest in her investors to come in and provide her more money, small monies to go build? So again, it speaks to regulation and it speaks to the demand side. So all the things that you have heard some of these people saying in the room is all about stimulating the demand. It's really important, which is why I don't care about OTT taxes. I don't care what you call it. But all this taxation that we're having across the continent right now is just crazy. It is, because it automatically ensures that Funke's business plan becomes more and more difficult, and you extend a break-even period from 20 years to 25 years to 30 years, and that makes no sense.
Gentleman in the burgundy kaftan, and then I think I'll take one question from my friend the CTO, and then we will finish. Martin, and then we will finish.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon, sir.
My name is Olusegun Oyetunji. I also work with DGV360, and I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. Nice. So we're not trying to make this a Lagos, Nigeria event. Okay? It's not I promise you, it's not deliberate as well. So thank you for the opportunity as well. And this is my first time in Kigali, and I noticed a few things because Africa is there, and to us all here. I've only also lived in Ghana for a while, so whenever I speak, I think some of the challenges are similar to an extent, and some of the things we see. It's interesting. I used to work in telecoms, Airtel Precise. I actually worked for 10 years, and one of the key things I heard while working as an employee, even though I was not on the network side, but of course different projects and all that. And what we keep hearing outside is this issue of rights of way in Nigeria. It's funny, like you said, the capacity for everything is there. And I'll give you an example. Apart from DGV360, we saw an opportunity as well. We started a tech hub recently, just a few months. We're in the heart of the commercial city of Lagos in Ikeja. And who did we speak to talk to us, to give us fiber? Min1. So we spoke to them, they were ready, and they were trying to come. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. There were issues. Laying cables and all that. And guess what? Their office was in the same local government where we are. To cut that story short, we had to go meet another company who could fly cables, all stuff. And that's to tell you part of the challenges. So the political will, not just at the federal level, but at the state and the local government level. I'm sure Larry understands this very well. So imagine if the federal says we want to do something. Those local government chairmen will frustrate the guys. They even cut the cables sometimes. So our fiber will go down. The ones that are, when the PHN guys come. So they mix up the cable. They're trying to work on something else. They'll cut our cable to our tech hub. So imagine what we have to grapple with every single day. So that's a major challenge. And I think it's just pure political will. Everyone is ready. That's the truth of the matter. I don't want to belabor that point, but that's just it. And not just at the federal level, but at our municipality levels as well. Please help us talk to them. I've been hearing this for 10 years. 10 straight years. Okay, all right, and just to quickly touch on the other points I wanted to mention as well. So another thing as well, because we had the opportunity of doing the Boost Your Business program with Sherry, lovely lady, and we went through 12 cities, 12 states in Africa, and it was, even though I'd been to different places, but I was going with a different, hat and all that. And I realized that in the rural areas, people are, of course, their own government, and they are making efforts on their own. So these things we're talking about, whether there's a demand, we think there's a demand, especially for SMEs, for businesses. Connectivity is great. They do amazing things that, apart from what we train them on, they even tell us things. You can do an application and they'll tell you what they use it for. On their own, they're quite innovative. Not what we're trying to train them to teach, but they'll tell you, oh, this is what you're telling me, fine, but this is what I use Facebook for. I try to check this and learn more about how to, feed my baby better. Things that, are really dear and hard to them. Not the problems that we think that they have, but the things that they're using, their social lives and everyday lives. So we need to come together really, and not just in Lagos, Nigeria, but in Africa. And, beyond the talk, action. We're in Rwanda here as well. We've seen some things. Ghana, yes, but we need to move forward. So digital skills, like the presidents and the excellencies have said, is very important. Not just very important. It's a fact that at that stage, as we are playing our own part as partners with Facebook and other bodies like this, we expect our leaders, policy makers, regulations, guys in NCC and all of them to really come down, come to these grassroots levels, and let's see things are happening and let's work together. Everyone is set and we're ready to transform Africa. Thank you.
Very, very well spoken. I'm going to take a final question because I'm shocked to see that it's 7:04.
Actually, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Facebook, for
Martin,
inviting.
please do introduce yourself as well.
My name is Martin Koyabe. I work for the Commonwealth Telecommunication Organization. Apparently, I took over Kojo's job, so that's the relationship. But thank you so much for inviting us here. Let me just try and reiterate something which I think has been said by the panel. But again, just reiterating, I think the political issue is a big issue. And I'll give you examples why we believe, as said by Professor H and the panelists and also with Kojo, is that if we take on the politicians and involve them in some of these particular discussions, then we believe something can trickle down in terms of the understanding. A good case is, for example, we've had an advisor who is here from Nigeria, and of course, maybe there's some issues he would have known prior to even coming here, but it's because of the lack of probably the communication or the political issues that might be existing at some point. So I think the political aspect of how we resolve this should be one way of looking at it. So how do we solve it? And this is why we go back to the panel. There could be some prescription that could either put some validation exercise, the buying in exercise before projects are done. That way we can save a lot of resources. There's also the political cycle that one has to be aware of, because 5 years down the line, another government comes in, the project is put on the side, another government comes in. So you have this cycle, and from data that we have and from information that we have, it's a lot of money that is wasted every year by many of the countries. And if you put that money all together in decades and decades that have passed, you could have attained that project a long time ago. And what Facebook they're doing, they're saying, look, we are able to support. So therefore, it shouldn't just be us creating the barrier. If there is a political issue, let's try and resolve it together. What I'm prescribing to the panel as a prescription is let's have a validation test that says, are you buying into the idea based on the principles that exist, based on your strategy, based on everything that you have, before we go on with the projects? Maybe that might solve the problem.
Thank you so much, Martin. Very good point. I'm going to close this panel partly because I'm tired and my concentration span doesn't usually stretch beyond an hour. So to do 2 hours is fantastic. But I'd like to thank you all for being here and listening. I think today we've learned a lot about what we believe the foundations for a transformed Africa are. We've spoken much about what Facebook's investments are, Facebook's belief in connecting the rest of the continent, which aligns with the governments of this continent, which aligns with the global accords such as the SDGs as well. But we've spoken about the investments that Facebook is making in partnership, and we continue to stress that, but in partnership with other players across the continent, and in partnership with those governments who create enabling environments for us to do so. We've tried to dig into what rides on top of that connectivity. And obviously Pepper presented some of the way the situation is now, the data, but we've tried to also dig into what rides on top of that connectivity. And the training and expertise that Facebook is trying to provide to Africans in the knowledge that they have an innate ability to seize opportunity when it appears. And at the same time, we've dug in through the panel into some of the most pressing questions. How might the public sector and the private sector work better together? And actually, there were some simple steps we could take. Some were mentioned by Sophie from the ITU, others mentioned by John, which include simple things like revising licensing to ensure a faster rollout. I want to ensure that MNOs and OTTs can provide provision and drive demand. I think Chris has mentioned some great points that we need to take a deeper look at this assertion that OTTs are taking away the revenues of mobile operators and ensuring that they can't invest. And I think we need to take another look at that. I think JF from the GSMA also made another point, and actually most mobile operators have accepted that this is the future, and what we need to see is a help to enable those mobile operators to transition to providing, to working with OTTs and living in a world in which OTTs and mobile operators work better together. We've also heard about some of the foundations for regulation, the need to focus on consumers, more so in Africa where there is a dearth of these consumers, and the fact that actually good regulation would put more onus on ensuring that we can grow consumer value and grow the number of consumers and grow consumer value. And then we had some great interventions providing vivid examples, most notably from Nigeria, where rights of way remain an issue, and the will of the people. And indeed, I know as well, having been part of planning for the broadband plan, or at least having witnessed how that was planned, that the will of government is there at the same time, but how do we get all of government to get behind it as well? So I want to thank all of you for your time. Thanks ever so much for what was really an enlightening discussion. Please feel free to engage with the panelists, some of those who will be in the AU or EU-AU meeting, as well as those of us here. And then feel free to engage with everybody else who's been here and contributed to this vivid discussion. Thank you ever so much.